Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And last week we got the January update. It's actually a pretty big patch that we received, quite a few changes. It includes the ever asked for shield slaves, so I do think that's a bit of a controversial move from CCP, because now shield super ships become even more tanky, even more powerful, if what I read is correct. The big thing is that the shield regen is not diminished by tie-dye, whereas rep cycles and things like that are, of course, and that does feel like it could be kind of an unfair advantage, but we'll see. I would say be careful if you want to invest in that sort of stuff, because the nerf bat might be needed on these new items. We also got a small event, apparently only until January the 27th, where you can go into special sites in low sec with missile ships in order to try and get some of those BPCs for the implants. Pretty interesting stuff. I'm not sure if it's for me. I might give it like a try, but I am fully expecting low sec activity to be up already. If it's for such a short amount of time, I'm pretty sure you'll get dropped for like 90% of the runs that you try to do on these sites. I may be wrong though, but we will see. Perhaps I'll make a Drake and give it a try. Perhaps I'll skip it because, well, shield slaves are not really something that I personally really need, although maybe for my rattlesnake it is possible, because that one got a buff, a buff through a roundabout way, but heavy missiles are buffed by 5%. Kinda crazy. Missiles and drones are basically my favorite combination, and then to see that the heavy missiles get a 5% damage buff, it comes as an unexpected change for me personally, but it could help the poor Drake, who was suffering for quite a little bit. Also, Plex for Good has started, so if you want to donate to help the Red Cross in Australia, which probably has quite a bit of work to do at this point with the bushfires there. I think they finally got some rain in Australia. That doesn't mean that the fallout isn't going to be sizable. You can donate Plex to the CCP Plex for Good character. I am going to make one note here. Some newer players that may think that scamming works with everything in EVE Online, this is something that you absolutely should not touch. Don't make a CCCP Plex for Good character or anything like that to try and scam your way into some of that Plex, into some of those Plex donations, because if that's seen, it's a permaban right away. You know, that is something that must not be touched in any way, shape or form. And yeah, that's it for the updates. I think pretty cool, and definitely means that I have some stuff to work towards and look forward to in EVE Online at this point. And yeah, the first quadrant, PvP centric, so I'm not sure how much of it I am going to be able to take a look at myself, but let's give it a chance, of course, and let's hope that CCP comes out with a monthly update and gives us quite a bit of info as well as we head towards FanFest. That means that we get to take a look at the New Eden store here. Is there anything special happening? We do have a sale on the Zento Isideko skin, 41 instead of 55 Plex. That's pretty damn nice. Also a sale for the Snowline Blade Racer skin down here. Interesting. Okay, couple of sales happening. Barghest and Ortrus skin. Ooh, and these look pretty damn good. Black and orange, that is a combination that I personally like quite a little bit. Those are discounted quite a bit as well. Yeah, we've got a few sales for skins happening in the New Eden store right now. Pretty good. I personally like this Ortrus and Barghest conversion skin. That looks pretty damn cool. And that means that we get to move on to the market, the reason why everyone is here, of course. So we're gonna start with some Plex and stuff at 420. Let's get going with Plex themselves. You may already have seen from the ticker, of course, we are up a little bit, 3.4 million for most sales in Jita. I don't really understand why you're putting a 3188 here. Just sell it directly to 3183. I think you're getting more ISK out of that anyways. And on the chart, what we do see is a slight uptick today, but more hesitation in the market. We're staying for the average prices pretty clear of the 3.25 million mark, so it's gonna be, what if I try to get to one of these, 3.2 million as the average price. It's been like that for the last 10 10 days. Pretty good news, I would say, for people that want to plex their accounts, because that is quite a bit more doable than when it costs more than 4 million ISK, which, yeah, keep that in mind. Of course, April, May, that is the FanFest season. We may be in for the start of an increase in price, which last year we had the very same thing. So we might be primed for that. We may not be. It all depends, of course, on what happens in EVE Online, and no one knows that for sure. But to me, if I look at this 1 year chart, it looks like we're in a pretty damn good spot to get ready for that increase in price. So in JITA we saw 3.4 million for most sellers, just below 3.2 for most buyers, and then if we go to the player on trade hubs, it's still 3.3 million for most sellers, and the buyers just close the gap ever so slightly, but they're still below 3.2. And so I would say that below 3.2 you can still grab plex at the moment, considering the 3.2 average price, and there's bound to be people that grab 3.3 from the sellers as well. So I would say that's still very good news if you're looking to invest in plex yourself. After that, the multiple pilot train certificates, I would say something that might be an indication of what's up and coming. Well, it doesn't show anything. We have that same 5-day moving average, very flat, just above the 1.5 billion mark, and no sign that the hesitation is over. It's just above 1.5 billion for the sellers, and JITA and the player on trade hubs being very close to one another, and just above 1.5 billion as well for the buyers. So super narrow margin for an item that is this expensive. Volumes are slowly dropping here at the tail end, and for now the market is basically in a wait and hold pattern, waiting to see what comes next. I'm a little bit surprised with plex also not moving because of plex for good. I thought that perhaps more demand would show up here, but that has been pretty slow at this point. After that, we have the skill extractor market, of course, that just as the plex market is hesitating at its low point right now, below 380 million ISK. You can see the upward potential, almost 500 million. April, May again. Are we primed for that same thing? I don't know, but it looks pretty interesting. 371 million for the sellers and 363 million for the buyers. And here we do have a pretty sizable gap. In JITA itself, the sellers go up to 382 million ISK. If at some point these guys turn out to be right and the sellers in the player on trade hubs start to lose their patience, then we will probably see the start of the upswing in prices here. What we still have left is the injectors, of course, and here are the large scale injectors. Not at a 1 year low point, but you get that same hesitation with a little bit more movement, going between 840 and 810 million ISK for the last 10 days or so. 5-day moving average pretty much sideways. It's a bit more volatile than plex, but that's also kind of normal with an 800 million ISK item. 835 million for the sellers, 807 for the buyers, and let's look at the margin in JITA again. 867, that's a decent markup from 835 for the sellers there. So perhaps this is a first sign that the upwards pressure is starting to mount, and it shows up in JITA first, but perhaps we will be in hesitation mode for a little bit longer. To be honest, we have that new update. We can see what they've done, but we really still don't know anything about CCP's plans for the medium and the longer term, except that they're gonna work in quadrants. So it's still, I think, pretty difficult to get hyped for EVE Online for those longer terms. After that, we have the small scale injector, and this one is basically also moving sideways for the last 10 days. Landed on 170 and is basically still right there. 175 almost million for the sellers and 160 million for the buyers. A decent margin, and in the player on trade hubs, it's to 170. That's pretty big difference in margin, just 4 million for this one, and the large scale injectors have that increase in price to JITA of more than 30 million ISK. Well, it's also quite a bit more expensive, so it might actually be more in line than what it looks like initially. And then finally we've got our other items. Here are the daily alpha injectors. Finally a little bit of a bump. Okay, keep in mind, of course, different market only for alpha clones. Bit of a bump in price and a bit of a bump in volumes here as well. Low point is 34.1 million. Selling now for 43 million almost. Buyers are up to 39 million as well. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I mean, this did look like we had 3 very pronounced bottom formations at around 34 million ISK. Those were your opportunities. Very noticeable as well, the big volume, so sales from CCP, sale from CCP, and even on this one, probably a small sale from CCP as well. Those were your buy opportunities, but I would entirely understand it if you decide to move into the plex market or the large-scale injector market rather than the daily alpha injector market, because your selling opportunities are quite a bit harder. This is, of course, a different market that's smaller than the full open market that plex and injectors, regular injectors, enjoy, of course. And then finally, we get the hypercores that are basically flat at around 340,000 ISK, 341 for the sellers, 322 for the buyers. Really narrow margin, direct purchase from CCP. Don't expect too much there unless CCP comes out with sales. Then you could get opportunities like here with the daily alpha injectors. That means we get to move on to the mineral market, coming in at 11 minutes. And here, titanium, you may already have seen that from the ticker as well. Another jump up above 6.5 ISK all of a sudden. Right now, if we go to the JITA prices, 683 for the sellers, getting close to that 7 ISK, which is a great price. That is where I would personally consider just selling if the stocks that I was holding on, if that was the case. Right now, I'm actually using all of my titanium to produce munitions at decent margins, but yeah, 683 is even historically speaking a very good price for titanium. Anything above 7 it becomes really very attractive. 618 for the buyers forced up above 6 ISK as well. Does mean that there is strong demand, less supply. It is that change in Nelsik, of course, where they no longer have Veldspar in their regular belts, and that means that we get to sell and produce this in high sec at better margins. Pretty good news, I think, for people that were looking into that entry level mining. If you get like 4.5 ISK for titanium, it feels like a real slug right now. It's definitely a lot better, I think, for newer players this way. Next up, we've got pyrite. That is basically flat but above 5 ISK, is doing really well to defend that price range. 524 for the sellers, 495 for the buyers. Definitely a nice 1-year chart for pyrite, but one thing to remember, pyrite used to be more expensive by quite a bit than titanium, which is far more abundant in the ores that you mine for it. So this is still this still feels a little bit like a reverse situation, like something that is not right just yet. And of course, I personally think that it's basically too abundant, despite the fact that there's less pyrite out there than there's titanium, and that is because the mineral costs across the board just aren't adapted to that new situation. From, well, it's new, it's from a couple of years ago when CCP decided to rebalance the mineral output in 0.0. After that, we have Mixon, pretty decent comeback at 55. I would actually say that that's a decent price, not a great price yet. 6.8 for titanium is actually a great price. 55 or 54.73 for the sellers of Mixon is okay. It's definitely a reasonable price. What's very noticeable here, 52.28 for the buyers. That's a very narrow margin. These have been forced up quite a little bit, so that's a nice recovery, I would say. And also Mixon, very much mineable in high sec, so good news for those newer players, those high sec miners as well. They're seeing their ISK per hour go up substantially for stuff that yields Mixon, titanium, and even pyrite is doing alright. After that, we've got the isogen market. That one is still struggling. You can see we tried to get back to 16, 17 ISK here late December. We're already back down. This is the one mineral that's actually suffering the most. That is the most overabundant in in New Eden at the moment. I would say comparing its production to its consumption, it's probably really bad, because this stuff used to be worth more than Mixalon, and right now it is struggling by quite a bit. So it's 14.4 ISK for the sellers, and we're talking 13.6 ISK for the buyers. Yeah, that is really bad. At least Pyrite made a little bit of a comeback and is able to maintain this higher price range. Isogen tries to break out and then just gets squashed by volume. So this is probably an investment right when we reached a 1-year low point of 12.5 ISK, driving the price back up to 16. But what happens? Just a 30, 40, maybe 50% increase in volumes for about a week crashes the price back down to those low ranges. It's really not the mineral to be mining at the moment, to be producing at the moment. But of course, if there's one mineral that could be on the radar for CCP to try and see a recovery in by maybe like doubling the needs or something like that in production, it's probably going to be Isogen. So for the very speculative investors, of course, a move like this when it reaches 12.5 can be very lucrative. But you're dependent on an intervention from CCP, I think, to change the current situation for this mineral. After that, we've got Noxium, which defended 300 ISK for the first half of the year pretty damn well, and after that it just wasn't going to happen after the Nullsec blackout. Basically, again, the story here, in my opinion, is that Nullsec adapted to the Nullsec blackout by focusing quite a bit more on its moon mining output, and that gave them the chance to also tweak their mixes, which is the reason why Noxium, which was probably still a bit of a bottleneck for them in certain situations, became more produced in Nullsec, and that price crashed as they adapted through the blackout. It's actually the same thing that happened to Mixalon, but Mixalon has always been their #1 bottleneck, and as a result here we don't have a recovery for Noxium just yet. This one is moving between 240 ISK for the sellers and 220 for the buyers, which is not that great. After that, we got our former Nullsec minerals. Here is Zydrine, that actually peaked up to 550 for a couple of days and is now back at the regular 500 level, 519 for the sellers, 478 for the buyers. Still a decent margin, so any change in supply can actually, I think, crash the price back down even more to a sub 500 level. And then we've got the Megasite market that also tried to get back to 400 ISK and just cannot defend that range. 385 for the sellers, 356 for the buyers. More pressure in the Megasite market as well, with another reverse situation. Megasite less than 400, Zydrine for around 500. The like a couple years ago, the situation was the exact opposite. Megasite was worth more than Zydrine. And then finally, we've got the Morphite market that is continuing to be very strong. Now that I produced a wolf for the first time, a Tech 2 item, I am starting to understand this like a little bit better. And yeah, Morphite, you can't get that from moon mining. That still has to come from Nullsec or maybe Lowsec as well, perhaps Wormhole Space, but I lived in Wormhole Space for a little bit, haven't really seen that. And as a result, yeah, they have a monopoly on this, so they can ask 12,200 ISK for the sellers, 11,900 ISK for the buyers, and it's really the sellers. Are we above 12k for the average price? You can see, yes, it is the sellers that are completely dominating the price. This is a situation that used to be the same for Megasite and Zydrine. That has changed completely, and so what you're seeing here is a decent margin, or no, actually a pretty low margin, but you've got decent volumes on the sellers compared to those buyers. It's actually huge, right? 600k, 200k, 150k here, 6,000, 3,000, 6,000. We're just trying to snag a little bit of Morphite at a slightly better price. It's really completely dominating by the sellers in JITA, and that is because it is an import product, and that makes it very interesting also for speculators. When there is a lot of demand for Tech 2 ships, prices go up, and you can make quite a bit of ISK on an increased price like this one here, from 7.5k to 12.5k. But if activity declines a little bit, we get a little bit of a slump, well, then you get a pretty massive pullback because no one's interested in buying that Morphite. But production in Nullsec tends to still be pretty strong. and as a result you get those incredible opportunities and those wavy movements. That has been completely killed in my opinion in the sidewinder market. If we, for instance, and Megaside, if we look at the numbers there, 3.5 million, 4.5 million, 3 million, another 5, another 4, this is just the output from a 0.5 system, a high 6 system corporation that has one of those moon refineries going, and that's a big difference here. We're also talking 520 and 478 for the prices, and look at where the average price actually lands, right in the middle of those two. So we clearly don't have a domination from the sellers in that market anymore. Only Morphite is basically in that situation, and right now it's very strong at a pretty damn high price. Let's move on to the PI market then, coming in at 20 minutes. Another round timestamp. As always, we'll start here with the broadcast nodes that actually did really well to get above 2 million by quite a bit, like about a week ago. It's normalizing at this point already. 2.1 million for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers, right around average. Construction blocks, this is finally interesting. The recovery is finally here after that fall slump that is quite noticeable. You can clearly see most of the year 11,000 disc, bit above that, bit below that, but that's the average price. And then in the fall season, after the summer, after the Gnostic blackout, we have this complete lack of demand that showed up, and we declined to a 1 year low, pretty noticeable one at around 8,200 disc. Slow recovery over the first few months, but now this is the first time when we finally break back out. 13,250 for the sellers, very good price. 11,000 for the buyers, right back on that average. Finally, the recovery for the construction blocks is here. We're back to a slightly above average price right now. Very good news, of course. And then if you look at the buyers that are up to 11,000 disc, 166 here, 123,000 units here, it's a decent amount of sell orders. Also, if we keep browsing, it really looks like we finally, at least for the construction blocks, have demand that starts to come back. Consumer electronics had that same thing, and this one has not recovered yet, so it's obviously not across the board at this point. 12,500 should be the average price, and here again, same pattern, September, October, we decline, 1 year low point reached 10,000 disc in November and in December, and we're still not there. Currently, sellers are coming in at 12,000 disc, they're trying to get back, but they're still a little bit off, and buyers 11,200 are clearly still below average. So we need a bit more time, I think, for consumer electronics. We had two very clear buy opportunities in this one as well, and that is basically going to be over, I believe, for most of these. I think we will start to see our recovery. Coolant's actually doing pretty well. Tighter fuels, so a bit more stable and doing quite okay. Actually broke out like 14,500 disc last week, is still at 13,500 to 13,850 for most sellers, 12,000 for the buyers. Very respectable for something that normally goes for around 12,500, so still a slightly above average price here as well. Then the cryoprotectant solutions. All right, well, new implant set, I guess, with the with the patch means massive volume spike, right? Like 3 times to maybe almost 4 times the normal volumes in cryoprotectant solutions. We were finally normalizing back to like the 130,000 ISK range. A normal premium, you would say, 153, 162,000 for most sellers, 118 still for the buyers, so those are not budging, but it's basically lots of demand that immediately grabs all of that cheaper stuff. Anything basically below this, once we start to recover, you'll see anything below this will be snagged up by this this volume spike, and yeah, this is of course the new implants that potentially require cryoprotectant solution. I'm gonna assume that it does at this point, considering what happened here. And so we get that lovely spike, a bit unexpected. I don't think a lot of people expected shield slaves to drop at this point, and as a result, yeah, something that could have been very juicy if you bought at the right time, of course. Enriched uranium next, tied to fuels, did well to get to 15,000 disc about a week ago. We're crashing back down pretty heavily though. 14,300 for the sellers, that's still okay, but 12,100 for the buyers. And you can here again see that big difference compared to the recovered broadcast nodes. Here is the demand there. Construction blocks, excuse me. Here is the demand there. And then the enriched uranium, yep, that's hardly browsable. So this is showing that there is still a lack of demand in a lot of the PI market at this point. Some of them are recovering nicely though. Integrity response drones next, managing to maintain almost 2.5 million. All right, the sideways movement practically for the 5-day moving average is very unexpected. Sellers are in at 2.5 million, buyers almost at 2.3 million. So integrity response drones back to a slightly above average price, commanding a bit of a premium. Very interesting, not sure where that comes from. Mechanical parts next, really good recovery as well, despite being tied to fuels. This one also crashed in September, and now you can see we're trying to get back to that 12k average. 11,900 for the sellers, we're almost there. 10,000 for the buyers, and that is still not great. Yep, still a bit below average, still needs a little bit more time to recover, I think. Organic mortar applicators staying below average, this one. Just above $1 million for the sellers, just below $1 million for the buyers. Really close to that 1 million average, which is below average for most of the year, so still not doing great. Robotics, slight recovery on the 5-day moving average, but we're staying well away from 100,000 disc. 90 to 95,000 for the sellers, 83,000 for the buyers. This is pretty damn low. Potentially, right, 83,000 for the buyers down here. You could still grab some robotics at a pretty cheap price, and at some point you will probably be able to sell that for above 100,000 discs. So that's not a bad margin, but keep one thing in mind, robotics is not very volatile. It's definitely a slow evolution when it comes to the price of robotics. You can clearly see here one slow spike up to 110,000 discs that takes like 5 months or so. Then we've got this decline here that is now held on for the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 7 months here. So it's not something that you'll make a profit on very quickly. It's something to buy and hold for the longer term, waiting for prices to get back to above 100,000 disc. Self-harmonizing power cores, this one had a spike to an above average price as well, but is going back down. We're talking 2.1 million for the sellers, 1.94 million for the buyers, back to this is actually an average price for these harmonizing power cores. Superconductors, finally another one that's recovery, an important one for me. It's still not at the average 12,500 disc, but the trend here is clearly visible. We're finally above that 1125k mark on the 5-day moving average. 12,000 to 12,100 for the sellers, 10,650 for the buyers. Still a large margin, but a slow recovery here as well. Then we've got the test cultures that is managing to hold on to 10,000 disc, not that bad. 11 to 50 in fact for the sellers, 9,000 for the buyers. Again, I mean, doing all right on this 1-year chart, but that margin between sellers and buyers is still quite sizable. That needs to be plugged by more demand if we want to see a full recovery of the PI market. And then finally we get Whitware mainframe, another one that jumped out to 2.5 million, is working its way back down. 2.27 million for the sellers, so that's definitely down quite a bit. 2.1 million for the buyers is right down here already. So a bit of a spike up in some of these advanced PI materials. I'm going to assume speculation on CCP announcing a structure. I think that is entirely possible, or maybe just a slump as well, because we have been trading these for a bit below average for quite a bit, so perhaps supply actually dried up a little bit here. Across the board, I'm seeing signs of recovery in demand, but it's still not there yet. One exception, construction blocks, has made it back to an above average price. That means we move on to the advanced wound materials, coming in at 28 minutes. We're just really hitting those round timestamps today, and let's get started here. So maybe quickly before I get started, I mean, I could still be wrong on this, but having now produced a Wolf, which is a Minmatar Tick 2 ship, I now finally see that the components have different components and thus different advanced wound material needs depending on the the race of the ship that you're making. So Amar has its own production line, Minmatar and Galente, and then finally Caldari as well, which is actually the reason why these have different price ranges. And so it doesn't really depend on output coming from certain regions or anything like that, but it's more dependent on the meta of the ships. If, for instance, the Galente get a massive buff and the Tech 2 ships become more powerful and more popular all of a sudden, you'll see that the Galente, such as here the photonic metamaterials, would go up in price. And or if they're flown in nullsec more, they become a doctrine, and then you see a whole fleet of them being blown up that needs to be replaced. That could potentially have spikes like this in the works. Of course, speculation still works here as well, but I think that that's more the thinking that we have to maintain when it comes to the differences potentially between these items. So photonic metamaterials clearly at a low point here, 15,000 disc for the chart, 15,400 for the sellers, 14,100 for the buyers. If you try to get something like that visible on the chart, you can clearly see that buyers are below the entire chart, and that would be a bit of an indication that there's not that much Galente ship production going on right now, which could be very interesting for instance, the stealth bomber that I like, the Nemesis. We'll see about that in a little bit, of course. Next up, we get for Minmatar plasmonic metamaterials. So if I want to make my wolf, then that should be something that I have to purchase. You can see that in December we went to 1 year low point, a bit of a recovery, and managing to maintain a decent price range of above 20,000. This is 21,000 for the sellers. Look at that demand as well, 20,000 for the buyers, really narrow margin. Compare that to the metamaterials here, that's definitely a pretty big difference. And this could be the impact of the rapid fire update, where Minmatar ships and their weapon system got a bit of a buff, so that means they might be at the forefront a little bit more of players trying to make Tech 2 ships, and as a result more than 20,000 disc for this metamaterial, 15k for the Galente one. Then we get our non-linear metamaterials that are going up slightly, and especially at the tail end here, back above 22,500. In fact, 24,400 for the sellers, 22,350 for the buyers. And this supply that has dried up here, if we go player owned trade hubs, we get some more, but still 24k. Very interesting, of course, and this has been a really good experience, of course, because now I understand that all of a sudden more demand should be because of the update. We got an update to missile, 5% buff to the missiles, so Caldari ships back at the forefront. What are you going to try to build? Caldari ships, shield slaves, same thing, could all require non-linear metamaterials, and so you get this supply that has not dried up. It's not because people are not producing non-linear metamaterials anymore, it's because demand has picked up, because Caldari ships are something to be made at the moment. You might get a better price for those. So really interesting, and definitely going back up a little bit. It's still not great, right? We're not at 25k, which would actually be the normal price range for this one, but it's clearly visible compared to the photonics here again, and so yeah, this gives me a much better understanding of this this market, I must say. Terahertz metamaterials finally for the Amar, excuse me, just recovering from a low point, staying below average, but still 22,000 almost for the sellers is not that bad, and 21,000 to the buyers, pretty narrow margin here. So I think that we have a decently good demand for something that's below average right now. Let's take a look at the carbides then. Here is crystalline carbonite. That one is basically hovering around 150 ISK right now, going back below that, 150 for the sellers, 145 for the buyers. Basically doing okay on this 1 year chart. Not great, but the volatility manages to maintain an average of 150, which I think is still kind of okay for crystalline carbonite. Then we've got the Fernite carbide that's actually going down in price, but look at that, also coming from 150 on this 1 year chart is actually slightly above average. So 131 for the sellers, 124 for the buyers. The answer here could again be rapid fire increasing demand, but of course at some point that levels off, and apparently it might be visible first in the carbide market, where supply, let's take a look at that here. Yeah, last 24 hours we get this stuff, then here last week or so we get quite a bit going down from, and we clearly see that jump here a couple days ago, well, no, a decent amount of days ago, from 150 plus to 147, and now we're down to the 130s. So it's new supply that has plugged this gap, and maybe it is because the rapid fire increased demand has been digested here first, and as a result we move back to a below average price for ferrite carbide. 124 for the buyers, not yet the low point, but getting pretty close to that. Something to keep in mind. Then we have the titanium carbide market that is quite a bit more stable at this point, tied to Caldari, and actually down a little bit here as well, while the 20-day moving average has actually been moving up from a 1-year low point. So this one is still struggling a little bit. 175 for the sellers, 168.5 for the buyers. Basically this does look like an oversupply chart to me. And then we have tungsten carbide that actually jumps up right here, tied to a more bit of a surprise, but also 175 is clearly below average, not doing that great. We're back to 190 for the sellers, 178 for the buyers, and this here is basically a bit of a jump. I don't really have a good explanation for that one. It's just jumping up to the average price again. Could be speculation, right? At some point people may be buying, of course, below average priced goods. That leaves us with some of the other advanced moon materials. Here is fermionic condensates actually dropping off, doing really well to hold on to 90,000 disc for quite a while, but it is not to last. New supply comes in, 88,000 for the sellers, 83,000 for the buyers, and that just crashes the price down to a new level below average. Ferrogel next, already not doing too well on this 1-year chart, is now just maintaining a price of just below 40,000 disc, 39,500 for the sellers, 39,000 for the buyers. Yep, trading well below average as well. Then we get our fullerenes that again we're holding on decently well to 1,000 disc for a bit, and now we're below that. These are clearly showing signs of being oversupplied. 923, look at that competition, 1,000, 970, 950, 940, 930, and now we're heading for the 920s. So this is clearly again oversupplied here across the board. Hypersynaptic fibers doing a little bit of a different move, but keep in mind here we were below average for the whole month of November and December, so we jump back and we are only now getting back to that 12.5k, which is normal. 13,000 for the sellers, 11.6 for the buyers, 12.5 average. Just an average price, and potentially going back down very quickly on these buy prices. Then we have the nano transistors, the one exception, 6,000 disc for the summer on a complete lack of supply. It came back, so we crashed back to the 5,000 normal range, and now we still have a little bit of volatility happening in this market. So 5,600 for the seller is still a pretty good price. 5,250 for the buyers is actually really good as well. So showing some supply that is taking advantage of these higher prices, but decent demand that is keeping all of this above average for sure. Phenolic composites finally. Oh no, that's not the last one, ceramic fiber still. This one is giving back some of its gains that it made in November. Staying above 2k I think is really good. 2050 for the sellers, 2035 for the buyers. That is not bad. So there is one exception here that is still right on its average price and actually trading like a touch above that, doing really well on the demand side as well. And then we've got ceramic fibers that doing okay, staying above 400 disc here, 440 for the sellers, 390 for the buyers, though here we clearly see a bit more of a gap between sellers and buyers. If we get more supply, which there obviously is, then we'll see more pressure and we could get back to a below average price pretty quickly here. So that's the advanced moon materials. Going through a Take 2 ship production line does help me quite a little bit with this market, especially the race, the ones that are tied to basically the Take 2 production of those ships depending on the race. So hopefully we'll be able to make more sense of that segment in the upcoming EVE talks. Next up, Take 2 ships coming in at 37.50. And then of course we have that closer correlation now where we can understand what's happening. So we know, for instance, that the Galente one was really not doing too well, while Caldari went up quite a bit. So this could be interesting if we then look for the difference between the Nemesis, which I would then expect to be pretty low and in a good place to try to buy, and then the Manticore, I think is Caldari. That one could actually be up in price all of a sudden, so that could create a sell opportunity. We could really have stumbled upon something very interesting all of a sudden. Let's get started as always with the Ares that went up to 35 million. That's the volatility that we love Tech 2 ship markets for, of course. You could have bought these for less than 25, sold them for 35. We're working our way back down. We're still at 30 million almost for the sellers, 26 million for the buyers. Obviously, you need a little bit of time to recover from something like that, so you can still sell at a pretty respectable price if you bought below 25 million. The actual sell opportunity is over, but it lasted for at least a couple of days here, so that was not bad at all to speculate on. Next up here we've got the Basilisk market that's starting to move a little bit between that 200-250 range. Right now sellers are coming in at 233, buyers are still at 200 million, but you can clearly see that we went as low as 180 as well. So I would personally be on a wait and see pattern for the Basilisk as well. Tied to Caldari, so up in price a little bit, perhaps because it's a bit more expensive to make right now. Cerberus, same thing, and that's where it does become interesting because I sold mine. Let's see if it's still in here. Yep, sold mine, bought for 195, sold for 250 million ISK. And look at that, right now actually I sold too soon, 314 million ISK. Well, who knew that they would buff Caldari ships with missile launchers? So obviously that was a little bit too soon. 262 now for the buyers. That is kind of crazy, but now this makes a lot more sense. Buff to Caldari ships or weapon system. Of course, the Cerberus is one of the most popular ships. I think this is also one that will be taken into those event sites right now. Increased demand, massive price spike, and I'm still very happy with the trade that I made, but obviously looking back now, had I known anything about that update, I would have made like double the ISK on that trade, because I would have been able to sell it for 300 million for sure. But now this spike makes a lot more sense to me. Next up here we have the Crow that jumped up a little bit as well and is staying, well, actually not doing that well. 29 million for the sellers, 25 million for the buyers, 592 here, 107 here. This one is clearly oversupplied quite a bit. 25 million for the buyers down here is not that bad. And yep, just for your information, of course, look at the Cerberus up in price, look at the Basilisk up in price. It really depends if you think that the market can absorb 700 crows to get those sell prices up. I personally think that's not very likely. At 100 a day, that's probably not gonna happen, but it could be a gamble for you to take. Next up here we get the Eagle, also Caldari, clearly up in price, up to 250 million, and you'll have to wait. 250 million for the sellers, 223 for the buyers, but slightly up here, and I don't think that that is gonna go back down anytime soon, considering what's happening with Caldari ships across the board right now. Next up here we've got the Guardian. That one jumped up to 230. It's a Mars, so we don't have any reason to think that this is gonna move like crazily well. And here I bought for 180, sold for 239 million ISK. 239 for the sellers right now, so obviously it is possible to do that. 185 for the buyers. These are up a little bit from the margin, but these are two trades that I made again in the Tech 2 market. Made some ISK on that. Pretty easy to do, to be honest, and I love the volatility here. Even the Guardian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sell opportunities. This was actually a fourth one where I took advantage of that, so smaller trade made here, but go below 200 million, buy the Guardian, so you could still make a move right now on the buy side of things, and then wait for the right time to sell. There's ISK to be made in this market for sure. Interdictors are a bit more difficult in my opinion. We do just move up to 70 million ISK for the sellers, bit of a lack of supply. 51 million for the buyers though. I tried to buy one and it's just not working out. Is it still here? I may have like cancelled that buy order, I'm not sure, but this one is just the volumes. Look at that, maybe 20 a day, even less than that on most occasions, crashing back down on this price range right now. Very difficult to trade in, very speculative. I would personally say definitely makes sense to buy at least 1 or 2 heretics, but you're holding these for the long term, hoping that CCP does something to the ship to bring it back and make it more popular, then 20 a day or 15 a day in JITA in trade numbers. The Hound, that could be more interesting. Stealth Bomber for Minmatar. I think that, I'll take a quick look at it now. Minmatar number 1, which is here for Night Carbide, actually going down in price, so we may be a little bit too soon, but the Hound is clearly not doing too well, staying below 25 million ISK here. 25 for the sellers, 23 million for the buyers. Last trade I made was at 22 million, so I'd have a little bit more patience, but considering where the corresponding advanced move material is going, we could see more pressure in the upcoming week. Definitely potentially a buy opportunity in the making. Let's see if all of this works out. Of course, it could be pretty interesting. Then we've got the Ishtar going slightly down in price, staying at 230, really able to defend that price pretty well. 230 for the sellers, 207 for the buyers. Very popular ship, of course, 100 a day for a Tech 2 cruiser, not that bad in the volumes, and able to basically ask its price and get it as well. I think here, because you've got demand from all walks of life, basically. You get raiders, you get PvP, you get explorers, even in wormhole space you can probably use these, maybe even in missions this can be useful. So the Ishtar just sees so many uses, it's so versatile because of the drones, the 5 heavy drones, that it is super popular across the board. Then here we get the Manticore Caldari actually going down in price. Very interesting in my opinion. 25.5 million for the sellers, 22.5 million for the buyers. Look at what's happening to all the other Caldari ships. I would say if you're gonna buy something, try to grab a Manticore well below 25 million, let's say around 23 million. You have a really potentially good purchase right there. After that we get the Munin, that's back at its 250 million range, 250 to 48 million for the sellers, 220 for the buyers. Decent margin here. Volumes are a bit worrying for me to be speculating on that one right now, but if you bought in December, of course, for 200 million or below that, nice 25% profit to take right now. And then we get the Nemesis, which I'm expecting to go back down in price. It is going down in price, went to 27.5 million. Where are those buyers? 20 to 150, 27 million for the sellers. It's starting to look interesting. I think we can go lower, but we'll have to wait. I want to see that chart land close to that 20 million again before I make a move here. If I'd make any move, it would be on the Manticore. Why? Because all other Caldari ships are going up. The margins here should be going up quite a bit for the producers. So I think that they'll, should be going down. They should become more and more expensive for the producers. So I'm expecting this to stop and basically sell prices to go up here. After that, we get the Oneros market back to a less than average price, 190 for the sellers, 170 for the buyers. Still really cheap, but again, look at the volumes, not one that I like to trade in. Purifier is more my cup of tea. Nice opportunity, went up to 40 million ISK. Again, look, 1, 2, 3, 4 very pronounced sell opportunities. Then we have a real decline, but also another opportunity at 40 million ISK. Not bad. Low point going as low as 22.6 million, high point 40 million. That is the volatility that we look for. Of course, we're back in the recovery phase, just like with the Aries. 29.5 million for the sellers, 28 million for the buyers. So too early to make any real moves on this one, but showing the potential for trade, of course. And then we get a Saber that's moving all over the place with better volumes by a lot compared to the Heretic. So here we are talking 66 million for the sellers, 61 million for the buyers, landing pretty much in between everything. So if I would want to trade in an interdictor at this point, it would probably be the Saber. And then we get the Scimitar that is crawling out of its low point as well. Went as low as 180 million pretty much on the chart. Is now getting back to 220 for the sellers, 190 for the buyers. Definitely a little bit better than the Oneros in volumes, but still not really great. A small trade that could have been made, I definitely did not. And then we get the Stiletto that is finally moving back down here and is basically staying here again at its current price range, 28 million for the sellers, 25 for the buyers. Basically not really enough volatility to warrant any trade advice or anything like that. My preferred sections are the Cerberus. I've made quite a few trades on this one actually. Look at the volatility, it's very, very nice. Then we've got stealth bombers are my favorite. Next up, logistics cruisers. Then the interceptors, they can still have their moments as well, but you can clearly see that it's not as good as, for instance, the volatility in the Hound chart. But overall, Tech 2 ships are doing really well. And I think that an opportunity in the Manticore may be in the works, considering what the Cerberus is doing, considering what the Basilisk is doing, and the Eagle as well. All up in price, and this one is still buying for 22.5 million. That's definitely pretty low for the Manticore. Let's move on to the Tech 3 ship market then, and this one's coming in at 48.30. So here last week it started to look like the oversupply situation was over, and we can see the Confessor move back to the lower end of its average range, 37.5 million, and stabilizing here. 38 million for the sellers, 33.6 million for the buyers, and look at that, that's a much healthier situation. Every sell order is below 10. This is clearly not oversupplied anymore, so I would say that that is pretty good news. Next up here we get the Headgate, that's landing at 42.5 million, also pretty much its average. 43 million for the sellers, 38 million for the buyers. That's still 233 and 51 here, but keep in mind, compared to like the 40 million, which I would put as a general average for these tactical destroyers in a healthy situation, this is still a decent premium, and so more supply here is still kind of normal. Are these really recent? This is actually 24 hours ago, so that is a lot of supply for the last 24 hours, but it is at this point the most expensive one. We've got the Jackdaw that's on that 40 million average. This one is going for 40.5 million, 37 million. Yeah, we got 57, we get 30 here, and then we go down to quite a few older orders. This is regular normal stuff, well supplied at its normal price, so that's a lot healthier as well. And then finally we get this Vapel, which last week recovered, is back at 40 million as well. 41 million in fact for the sellers, 37 million for the buyers, and here supply is really not crazy, actually a little bit low for its price range. I'm fully expecting the Headgate to actually go back down a bit in price on all of these ships, and then production to slow down as well, so that we can stabilize at 40, move that a little bit to this Vapel, go back down at 40 as well. Gives the Confessor, which has some breathing room now, to go back up there as well. We have recovered. Right here you can see Confessor, that's a bit of a slump. In the Headgate, that's a pretty obvious slump. In the Jackdaw, also a little bit of a slump, not that bad. It is definitely an awesome ship. And then for this Vapel, same thing here, another fall slump, and this was completely tied to oversupply. It was very obvious, we had too many sell orders, and that crashed the price for almost all of them. But we're finally recovering from this, and you can clearly see only the Headgate still has a lot of ships on it, but it's also trading at a higher range than all the other ships. So really looks like we're recovering, and like we'll get to that 40 million range. So I bought some Confessors, if I'm not mistaken, for 27.5 million. Could already sell them. I'm fully expecting 40 million to be possible in the upcoming weeks as well. Looks like I bought at the right time. Should have bought some Headgates down here as well, some Jackdaws down here as well, but very good lesson, right? Over the summer it was really healthy market, everything was working as expected. Then we saw that oversupply, and I was very hesitant to move on it until of course the Confessor made this move down here. But this is a very good lesson that this market does work, and finding those opportunities can yield you quite a bit of risk. That means we move on to the cruisers then. Here is the Legion going back down in price to 140 on average, 154 for the sellers, 132 for the buyers. That is really low, that is below the entire chart. You could definitely make a move on the Legion from the buy side of things. Supply is slowing down, but it's still last 24 hours. 50 down here is quite worrying, so we're definitely oversupplied. Look at that competition as well, 164 million down to 154 million. That is quite a bit here. We're trading very low on not that much supply. There just isn't any demand here. You could, I think, buy a Legion to try and sell it at a better price later. Loki's doing something different, going back up to 200 million ISK, on the chart, but not getting there on its price range. 194 to 193, in fact, for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. Supply wise, last 24 hours, a full page. This is actually okay considering the price of the Loki. It's going to be by far the most expensive Tech 3 cruiser. And then we get Proteus at 150, maybe a touch below average here. 139 for the buyers. That's kind of crazy, right? Buyers for Proteus 139, buyers for Legion 131. That's really low. And then finally we've got Tengu as well, that jumped up a little bit back to the 180 range, already recovering back down on new supply. 174 for the sellers, 152 for the buyers. Yeah, if you want to make a Tech 3 move right now, Legion buyers 131 to 132 is really low, considering how popular this one normally is in nullsec doctrines. That's the one opportunity that I'm seeing right now. And then finally, for the extra product this week, a request actually to take a look at some Tech 2 missiles. Not necessarily everything, but I thought it was interesting considering I'm producing Tech 1s and made my first few steps in Tech 2 production as well, coming in at 4340. 5340. Like that. So we're talking munitions, missiles, and then let's start with the heavy missiles, of course, because these have been buffed by 5%. Yep, volume increase quite substantial. 500 disc most of the time, I would say. 800 disc for the sellers, 475 for the buyers. That's a nice margin bump all of a sudden because of the patch, of course. So if you're producing Tech 2 heavy missiles, you are in for a good time on the sales. Mjolnir, not as popular. This one is not moving that much. We do have a volume increase. Normally, again, 500 disc would be the average right now. 500 for seller, 600 for most. Not that much supply. Or let's take a look at the player on trade hub. Not really having an impact here. So Mjolnir heavy, Fury heavy missile, not that great. Nova, a bit of a volume increase, but not too much in the price, selling for less than 500 disc. That's not going to be a great margin for producers, I don't think. And then Scourge also really flat at 500. So it's all about the Inferno heavy missiles. It may be that the event requires its thermal damage output here, and that's why we have this patch bump for the Inferno heavy missiles. But across the board is actually pretty stable, slightly up in price on the 1 year chart, but really nothing too spectacular. Very stable product outside of like one spike. Inferno heavy missiles, yeah, were already pretty expensive, I think, at 700 disc. 670 for the first seller, 600 disc for the buyers here. Yeah, definitely really popular right now, and probably at a decent margin. And then we get Mjolnir precision missiles back down to 500, right on its average. Nova, that one actually up a little bit all of a sudden. Is it 750? Almost, but yes, supply coming in very quickly to plug the gap. And Scourge heavy missiles slightly above average, but not by too much. Honestly, if you're producing this from high-sec, unless you've got like the right rigs and everything, I think it's very difficult to make ISK on Tech 2 production of these items. Let's take a look maybe at the light missiles. Then we've got advanced. So here's the Inferno Fury light missile, right? Very stable, above 100 disc, but that's really all there is to say about that. And that's a bit surprising, right? For a Tech 2 item where the ships are so volatile, do no spikes here. This ammo, these missiles, very, very stable across the board. And the light missiles actually feel like they're at the low end of their range as well. Let's go for the high precision ones. Here we do have a bit of a bump for the Inferno precisions, 128. It's a bit of a bump, but honestly, it's not even that great. Mjolnir just above 100, Nova just above 100, Scourge just above 75. That's probably the least popular one as well. We could end up maybe with the cruise missiles, I think, for missioning. This could be interesting, but yep, same pattern, right? A bit of volatility, but nothing that great. And then right now we're basically on the average 500 disc for one of these missiles, and that is about it. Then for the precision ones, yep, look at that, just above 500. Just above 500. One spike here in October, But other than that, there is not that much to say about the Tech2 missiles. A very, very stable product, but I think competing with Nullsec on production here is gonna be very difficult to do from HiSec. They have the better margins, and it's next to impossible to compete with those. So I would not recommend that, to be honest, for Tech2 production in HiSec. It's just too stable, too easy to produce enough volumes and to plug the gaps in this market. And as a result, unless you get very exceptional situations like right now, we get a buff to the heavy missiles, and so the most popular one that are also tied to an event. Yeah, these all of a sudden do see that right margin, but other than that, it's too stable and too thin in margin, in my opinion. That's gonna be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.